Starting our look back on the season, how bad was it really? We get the national perspective on that with Howard Beck, plus Joe Mazzulla, what kind of job he did, and two assistants being hired, Sam Cassell and Charles Lee. What does that mean? It's all right now on the Locked On Celtics podcast.
Be ever ready. Recognize the city of champs. Boston, baby, we do what you can't. Locked on number 18, Tatum and Brown, J-team, step back. We gon' wet that and slay teams. Of course, the Celtics, who else could it be? Screaming like KG with the Larry O.B. Karalis above average, assessing the team status. Best daily pod, no cap, salary matching. Clutch like Bird the DJ, keep John on replay. Prime time, dapping up the truth on the sideline. Raining J's, how it started, raising banners, how we finished. Locked on Celtics pod, home of the winners. B.
Hey there, welcome back to the Locked On Celtics podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day, and I'm here for you every day with a free, fresh podcast dropped directly to your device if you're a subscriber every Monday through Friday. So open up your favorite podcasting app, subscribe, get the show as soon as it publishes. Same thing on YouTube. Ring the bell, get notified when I drop a video. Hop into the comments section. Let me know what you think about the podcast, about everything Celtics. I'm John Karalis. I cover the Celtics for Boston Sports Journal. I used to play once upon a time, and now I'm here to kind of begin the really true, full, in-depth, in earnest look at the offseason, bringing in Howard Beck for this podcast so we can get the outsider's perspective on how this season went. We're knee-deep into it. There's a lot of knee-deep Celtics perspective. Let's get the outside perspective. Today's show is brought to you by PrizePicks. First-time users get a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code Locked On. That's PrizePicks.com, promo code Locked On. Later on, we'll talk about Joe Mazzulla, the job he's doing. The Celtics are about to hire Charles Lee, according to Adrian Wojnarowski. I think that's a good move. We'll talk about that a little bit later on, and the staff that's being built around Joe Mazzulla. But let's just kick into it. What's the perception from the outside on this Celtics season? All right, Howard Beck, I really, to look back at this season, there's so much, as you might imagine, consternation, let's call it, about how the Celtics season has ended. I would love to get your outside perspective on how you thought, just generally, how did this Celtics season go, if you had to characterize it?
With apologies to a Celtics rival named Giannis, it was a failure, as Giannis's team was. You can't view this any other way, right? There's no point in dressing it up or trying to rationalize it. If you're a team that made the finals and had a plausible shot at winning the championship last June, and you didn't make it to this June, and you had the same basic personnel, and in fact, even better personnel, because you added some pieces, you had some young guys who added some things or evolved a little bit. Like, you're supposed to make the next step, and it doesn't always happen. But there are times where you can kind of wave it off as, oh, if not for this one massive injury or this one, there's sometimes circumstance. And in this case, if you want to say circumstance, I guess you can point to Jayson Tatum getting injured in the first seconds of a game 7. Okay. Should they have ever been in game 7? Should they have ever been down 3-0? Should they have ever been positioned that they had to be the first team in NBA history to attempt or to accomplish coming back from 3-0? There's plenty else before the Tatum injury, but okay, maybe everything tipped on that injury, maybe. But it's a failure because, by all accounts, and this was the case before the playoffs had even started, as we're heading toward the postseason, and I'm just kind of, doing the idle chit chat with scouts and GMs and other people around the league over the course of weeks. Everybody agreed the Celtics were top to bottom the strongest team that had the best talent, and they were co-favorites with the Bucks to win not just the East, but the championship. Whoever won the East was supposed to win the championship, and that team was supposed to be Boston or Milwaukee.
Yeah.
And so Boston's, bitter ending in a game 7 of the conference finals, not nearly as humiliating as Milwaukee being knocked out in the first round. But a failure is a failure. You're supposed to be back in the finals. That is the harshest view of it. I am generally one who does not go that far with it, but that is a fair assessment of it. I do think that to the extent that everything in this league, there's always some luck involved. There's always, an injury here, a call there, a late rotation here, whatever. Like Phil Jackson used to say that these things turn on a trifle. It was this funny little phrase he liked to use when I was covering him in LA all those years ago. And I always come back to it. These things turn on a trifle. It's sometimes just it's a few of the little things. And if you want to view it through that lens, I think that's fair too.
Yeah, it is tough the way the season ended. And, I've been looking at, people said that maybe I've gotten to the acceptance stage of grief or how badly the season ended. And it does come down to, I do think the Celtics developed some bad habits, or I shouldn't even say develop bad habits. They continued bad habits. They didn't break bad habits from the previous season, or even before, where they do tend to play just too loose whenever they think they've got things in the bag, and that's just something that continues to haunt them. However, I do add the element of, man, they ran into a buzzsaw with this Miami Heat team. Like there is some level of that Miami team went on prior to the finals, a run where they were shooting so outrageously well that you could screw up and screw up in a way where in the past, okay, maybe a couple guys would hit some shots and maybe you could still survive. Against Miami, when you screwed up one of those rotations that you talked about, all of a sudden it was like an 11-0 run or something like that. And we saw it. They did it to Milwaukee. They did it to Boston. They've done it to Denver too. It's just that Denver, aside from game 2, has had answers late in games. So I bring that up just to say that for all of the failure talk, which is accurate, I still think they can largely unchanged come back next year and make that run that they should have made this year, without feeling like, oh, we need to add this guy, we need to add some shooting, we need to add this. To me, it's within these guys to get their act together. They certainly need an attitude adjustment, but this roster, as currently constructed, should be good enough to come back next year and be like, okay, you know what? We screwed up twice in a row. We get it. We're going to come back with a little bit of a chip on our shoulder and run through this and win a championship.
I'll take it a step further, John. I hate to say this because this is going to feed into all kinds of fan grievances out there.
Okay, hold on. Let me write down the time code here. So when people are...
You ready? Ready? Get ready.
Okay,
here we are.
go.
As soon as the championship celebration is over and we say who's the favorite next season, I could see Boston in the top 2 of that conversation, if not number 1.
Yeah.
And people will default to the Nuggets if they're about to look, we're on the verge here. It looks like they're going to clinch this, right? So no disrespect to Miami Heat, but it looks like the Nuggets are going to take this. The second the champagne, it won't be dry yet. There will still be champagne streaks everywhere. And we'll say, well, who's going to win it next year? And Boston will vault to the top of the list.
Yep.
Over Miami, possibly over Milwaukee, because Milwaukee's got bigger question marks. Are they bringing back Brook Lopez? Are they bringing back Chris Middleton? Is Philly bringing back James Harden? Is he staying? Like the Celtics will be the favorites. I'm not an odds guy. I'm not a Vegas guy. I don't know what the sports books are going to do, but that stuff will come out within minutes. And there will probably be, again, a default to the Nuggets, assuming they win the championship, because that's how these things go. But I guarantee you Boston's no worse than number 2. And and deservingly so, for the same reason that the consensus around the league was that they had the best top to bottom talent and should be the favorites when the playoffs began. And you're right. There were some bad old habits that crept in. This team gets stagnant and resorts to a lot of one-on-one play in times of either times of crisis and or times of too big of a lead, too much relaxing, whatever. Like they were always playing with fire in this playoffs run, going all the way back to the first round when they probably should have swept the Hawks and certainly should have put them away easily, no worse than 5 games. But they're just constantly flirting with disaster. They don't know how to handle, good fortune. And so that's a problem. And that's something you got to grow out of.
We'll get into some of the coaching discussion next with Howard Beck. First, today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. If you know me, you know I'm a big proponent of therapy in maintaining your mental health. There is absolutely no shame in saying that I have gone through therapy. I am a very strong advocate for therapy. I also understand that it can be difficult finding a therapist. A lot of times you're limited. Who's in my area? Who can I go to that's within driving distance? And the time commitment to it all can be something that's off-putting, where you say, okay, I'm going to take 2 hours out of my day to drive, go, talk, come back, and all that stuff. It's hard. BetterHelp is a way to get into therapy, get you the kind of help that you need, whether it's just maintenance of your, current state of mind, to get through something that you need to get through, to talk through something, whatever it is. You can go to betterhelp.com to find yourself a therapist. It's very easy. You do a quick questionnaire that gets you matched with a licensed therapist. If that therapist is not working for you, you can switch at any time for no additional charge. It's all done online. You can do video chats. You can do text-based. You can do it through the phone. It works with whatever your comfort level is. So it's very kind of customizable to what you're trying to accomplish, how you're trying to kind of the goals that you're trying to reach. So if you're thinking about starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. Find more balance with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA today. You get 10% off your first month. It's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA for 10% off your first month. I think this team has gotten, I'm not going to say a pass, but the caveat has been attached to still a young team, but they're not still a young team anymore. They're now firmly into their, we'll say, prime of their run. Derek White going to be 29 this summer. Jaylen Brown, when the season starts, will be 27. Robert Williams, it surprises me that he turns 26. He seems younger than that.
Yes.
Tatum's going to be 26. Marcus Smart, 30 within 3 days of each other right before the playoffs start next year. So you've got guys that are knocking on the door of 30, not to mention Al Horford. This team, now is the time. And if in your mid-20s in the NBA, you can't get out of these habits, then I guess my fear would be there's no getting out of these habits. If you can't break that now, if you can't break that by 27, the only time you can change that is when you're 32 and you haven't won a title because you keep doing this thing and you realize, oh my God, I finally have to change my ways.
You mean the Paul Pierce, Ray Allen, Kevin Garnett championship team that
boom
5 minutes
the
before
Paul
that
Pierce
team
plan.
5 minutes before that team formed, 5 minutes before that team won the championship at the latest, we were still regarding Paul Pierce as a really talented knucklehead who couldn't pull it all together and needed. Remember, I mean, there was a different Paul Pierce that we knew for 6, 7, 8 years before the Finals MVP version of Paul Pierce.
It's
right?
One of those things that I think the younger generation of NBA fans, Celtics fans, doesn't really realize, because that season, Paul Pierce took an absolute turn. When you remember the loss to Indiana with the wrap.
I was there. I asked the question. I was sitting front row. Yes.
Oh, that is amazing.
I asked the question. Paul himself will not remember this, but I was sitting there, the front row, and I'm looking up at him with the tape wrapped around his head, and nobody had broached it yet. And I was like, I was with the New York Times at the time, so we're always bouncing around covering all the playoffs. I happened to be there for that game, and I asked the question. Yeah. what are you doing with all this tape on your head? And it had something to do. I think he tried to make some cutesy allusion to the idea that he had been roughed up or whatever, right? Like the whole idea was that, he had been abused out there. So,
so I don't think Tatum or Brown are at that level, but there is some place in between that they're not quite at that turnaround level. Now let me ask you this. Jaylen just made all NBA. And he's going to get presumably he's going to get a Supermax deal. Tatum's going to get his next Supermax deal. These guys are going to be on their third contracts. We know how it goes in the NBA with first, you got to prove yourself, then you've got to make your money, and then you worry about winning a championship. And that's just a general kind of feeling about how the flow of a young star's career goes. Well, they've proven that they belong. They now have gotten they will both, when they sign their deals at that moment, it will be the richest deal in NBA history. So they've gotten their money. Now, maybe, is it possible that they can say, okay, we've gotten all that other stuff out of the way. This will be the year where they say, let's figure out how to truly play together and win a championship.
Yeah, and listen, I think that it often is the evolution of a young star in this game, right? Especially young stars that have a lot of just the skilled stars, the guys who have the ball in their hands a lot and therefore a lot of responsibility to both score and play make and be the ones who set the tone for the rest of the team, right? And if you have a tendency to resort to bad habits and selfish play, ISO play, whatever, if you're the one who's like kind of short-circuiting the offense, those are the steps you have to take at a certain point to go, hold on, I need to reevaluate my own game and the proper balance, and I need to make better decisions, and I need to consider my own responsibility and all of this. Yeah, those things happen sometimes when you get to your, maybe mid to late prime years, and that's kind of like the Paul Pierce version of this, and we've seen various versions of it. But I don't know that the money part of it is necessarily the biggest part, right? Especially in today's NBA where you are very wealthy very early in your career. Like you're not. So there was a time when you had to get off that rookie contract and really get to your second or third contract to really make the big money. Now, guys, like by the time you get to your third contract, you've got generations of your family already set for life. So I don't think it's so much that. I just think it's sometimes you can't fast forward evolution of game habits and the way you view the game or the way you're going, like you have to figure these things out as they go. The reason we have this unwritten law in the NBA of young teams getting, breaking through, getting smoked the first time they're in the playoffs, maybe getting smoked the second time they're in the playoffs. Then they finally make it to a semifinals or a conference, and you got to like keep getting knocked down before you get up and figure it out. The reason for that is because sometimes you have to learn some hard lessons along the way about what team play is. And so I think that that's a lot of what happened with listen, Paul Pierce didn't exactly have the greatest teams around him, all due respect to Antoine Walker and company. But I think Pierce himself needed to go through those things and figure out how to be the best version of himself. Are Tatum and Brown still in that evolution somewhere along the way? Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment. I think that's why, a season and a half ago, Marcus Smart's calling them out publicly, and Ime Udoka's calling them out, right? Maybe not directly, but there's a recognition that their two best players needed to be better, and not better talent, but better approach to the game, better integration with their teammates. So I think that can still happen. And the argument for keeping this whole thing together as we quickly move into the offseason of rampant speculation about every star in the league who could be traded, and Jaylen Brown's in the top 3 names probably right now, speculatively.
Sure, yeah.
But as we move into that, the case for keeping this together is, look, the talent is there. There's a great case to be made for these two having still all the potential in the world as the core. Give them a little more time to figure it out, and give them more time to figure it out with some stability, perhaps on the bench.
Oh, you're a pro at these. Well, let's transition into the Joe Mazzulla conversation.
Look at that segue,
man. And there's nothing more than that podcasters love than a good segue. We can't just let it flow. We got to stop. You make a good segue, and it's supposed to bring us into a smooth transition. And we at the podcast industry love to just slam on the brakes and congratulate ourselves on good transition. So with that being the case, Joe Mazzulla is coming back, and we, you're doing a great job here on the Locked On Podcast Network, bouncing around from team to team to team to team. We are like knee deep in like every little, Joe Mazzulla didn't call a timeout until 7:22 of the fourth quarter. What does that mean? If you look at a guy who got the job 2 days before or a day before media day, didn't get to put his own staff together, which we'll get to in a second, and had no plan, no nothing. When you look at that job, where he got, I don't know, man. I think a lot of people are really down on Mazzulla, and he has a lot to learn, but I've never been quite as down on him. I think the biggest question has always been, yeah, he might have this potential, and we can see some things that he can, he's a good basketball mind. Does he have the experience to lead this team? So I guess we can say what kind of job did he do, but do you think this experience that he just went through, considering all the circumstances, and now he's starting to put his own staff together, do you think that's giving him enough of a baptism by fire that next year he can kind of catch up to the level of experience where he needs to be to actually do the little things in the playoffs to get the Celtics out of their own way? More on the coaching and the new hires, Charles Lee coming in, him and Sam Cassell. What does that mean? What message are the Celtics sending there? Talk about that next. First, today's episode brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy and fun, and maybe making you a millionaire, because right now for the next, maybe it's just one more game in the NBA Finals, one PrizePicks user will get a chance of becoming a millionaire. If you place your entry after 8 a.m. standard time, you could be the one person selected at random for a 6-pick flex. If you get all 6 picks right, you get $1 million. You still get 80,000 if you get 5 picks right, or 16 when you get 4 picks right. So you can still make plenty of money here. Full details at prizepicks.com/million. Prizepicks.com/million. You got to opt in there. You get all the details there. Once you opt in, you play PrizePicks daily fantasy like normal. You pick your 2 to 6 players. You go through any sport, whatever you want. You can go against the projections. You're not playing against me. You're not playing against people or experts. You're playing against the projection. They set the number. You pick more or less. Boom. If you get it right, you win. Any sport you can think of, any sport that you watch, it's there. It's available. Entries, 60 seconds or less. Super easy, safe and fast withdrawals. Currently operational over 30 states and Canada. You also get a 100% instant deposit match with the promo code LOCKEDON. So go to prizepicks.com or download the PrizePicks app. Enter the promo code LOCKEDON. Deposit up to $100. They match whatever that number is, up to $100. You got to enter the promo code LOCKEDON for that instant deposit match up to $100.
Apparently Brad Stevens thinks so. because he kept him. And look, there's risk to that if you're the GM to say, like, this is the guy that we did this out of just sheer necessity at the moment that we elevated him. We had no other moves to make. I mean, I guess there were, I guess they could have elevated Damon Stoudemire or somebody else, right? But they chose Mazzulla in the moment at a time of great stress for the organization and a crisis, and you did what you had to do, and things didn't go exactly the way you wanted to. You've got a chance to step back and say, okay, look, in the, light of day here, when we've got time, should we choose a different coach? And they did not. They chose to stick with him. So that's a huge vote of confidence in him and in themselves, in their own judgment, right? Just as Brad Stevens took a leap of faith of sorts in replacing himself with Ime Udoka. And Ime came highly regarded and had been regarded for years as a great head coach in waiting who just needed his first opportunity. When your first opportunity comes with a team that is a plausible contender and the stakes are at their very highest, you have shown a huge degree of faith in your ability to judge coaching talent. So he did that with Ime Udoka. He's now done it again with Joe Mazzulla. Brad Stevens, I will just say, knows more about coaching than me, probably than you. I'm not sure. I don't want to speak for you, but definitely than me.
Yeah. Thank you for not speaking for me, Howard.
And so like to the point of us all judging timeouts and rotations and this and that, Brad Stevens is seeing all the same things we are, but Brad Stevens is also seeing practices and shoot arounds and he's probably not in the film sessions, but I mean, he's got a better pulse on all of those things. The 95% of the job that's done at times that none of us get to see, Brad Stevens has a much better feel for. So I'm going to assume that Brad has got a pretty good grasp of what Joe Mazzulla's strengths and weaknesses are and where he can improve. And also, I think the whole organization has to take a step back and think about the position they put him in, having already lost Will Hardy and then losing Damon Stoudemire along the way, and having already lost, Ime obviously himself, and having this skeleton staff with no time to really hire anybody, or for Mazzulla to get his quote unquote own guys, or to have a training camp, or anything else. So like all of those things need to be weighed in, and it's why teams, generally speaking, try to take a beat and take a deep breath before making big decisions like this. If they had decided to fire Mazzulla and throw it open and say, you know what, Nick Nurse is available, let's go get Nick Nurse, or let's go get Monty Williams, or whoever else was available, bring back Doc. They could have they could have done that, and I would have thought, you know what, that's reasonable too. And in fact, that might have felt better, I'm sure, to Celtics fans, and I think probably just to the general public. Like, okay, that makes sense. The rookie head coach, never coached in the NBA before. He was back in the bench. Gets elevated, goes rough. They didn't make it. They made it to Game 7 of the conference finals. Like it was not like they got swept in the first round or something. So anyway, either of those outcomes I would have understood. There is, I think, for sure, more risk in the path they chose by keeping him.
See, I think there's a ton of risk in bringing in that next, if they were to move on from him, fourth coach in 4 years, another new voice, that would have had to be the absolute perfect hire. That guy would have to be here for the next, 5, 6, 7 years with no real hiccups, no real growing pains, no nothing. That would have to come in. They'd have to buy in right away. That to me, I think Brad Stevens has one more bullet left in that gun for a coaching change. So I don't think there's. I think Joe Mazzulla is going to have to really, really fail, like last place into Christmas, and at that point where it's just going to be very clear that the team has completely quit on him, and that's the only way I can see a coaching change happening in the near future. I think they've started addressing the obvious weakness with this coaching staff that they're starting to build. Sam Cassell is going to be coming in, and as we recorded this, Adrian Wojnarowski comes up with the breaking news that Charles Lee is finalizing a deal to join the Celtics. Charles Lee is going to be the associate head coach, which surprises me because I thought that's what Sam Cassell would be. But regardless, Charles Lee was the associate head coach with the Milwaukee Bucks. They won a title with him on the bench. Sam Cassell has won 3 championships as a player. He's bounced around and seen a lot. This is adding experience to Boston's bench. They're keeping Joe as the head coach. These guys are coming in. I think, they're there to support him. And I think everybody coming in, knowing what the deal is going to help him kind of get through those rough patches. But I think the edict is very clear just by the 2 guys that they've hired so far. Joe doesn't have that depth of experience, which is what I've been saying all season long. It's impossible to have, no matter how good he is, not having seen anything. You know how it is. Look, when you were first reporting, your first year as a reporter, you're like, where do I go? Where are the bathrooms in this place? Where's the media entrance? And now you walk in and you're just like chatting with everybody, and everybody knows who you are. And it's just, everything slows down. You know exactly the cadence of everything. You know, when somebody, oh God, this guy didn't come out for his warmups at the certain time. What's going on with that? All of that is to say, they're kind of like, they know the opportunity is now. You can't fast forward, as you said, you can't fast forward the experience. So here's a bunch of experience on the bench with you and Cassell and Charles Lee and whomever else they hire. Now you lean on them. They support you. You got to listen to them. And this is your chance to pull this all together.
Well, and there's a long history in this league of when you're hiring a young coach or hiring a first-time head coach, having that person hire, an old head to bring along with them, so, whether, Steve Kerr got Ron Adams on his staff, when Ron Adams had also been on, the Thunder staff.
He was with Doc.
He was with Doc. He was, I think he was with Scotty Brooks in Oklahoma. And I think that was Scotty's first head coaching job too. Right. I think of like Del Harris was on Avery Johnson's staff in Dallas. I think Del was also on a Bulls staff with maybe Vinny Del Negro, but like there is a tradition of like having especially a former head coach to be as one of your top assistants, because look, it's not because they're a coach in waiting, break glass in case of emergency. It's more that you need somebody who's kind of seen it all, done it all to help you with, whatever. So this is not the case with Cassell and Charles Lee, but they are both longtime tenured assistant coaches. And in Sam's case, as you mentioned, championship experience as well, and Boston experience for that matter. So they're not former head coaches, but they're both guys who we've thought at some point will be, and with a wealth of experience. You need that. Everybody needs that. Even experienced coaches want other experienced coaches with them. And arguably Mazzulla needed it more than most and had less of it than most because of just circumstance last season. So, he had, that was probably the toughest possible baptism by fire. Right. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, he's wired the way he is. Now, I've been assured that Joe Mazzulla has much more personality and and ability to communicate in an interesting way in other situations that do not involve a podium and a microphone, or a microphone and a timeout in the middle of a national game. But I would just say, if I've never been a PR or image consultant, but my gosh, if I were working with Joe Mazzulla in that kind of capacity, I would say, dude, please smile occasionally, just a little bit, lighten up, tell a joke. Everybody, people who know him much better, I don't know him at all, but people who know him very well tell me, like, great guy. Certainly has a lot more personality, but the problem when you cut yourself off to the extent that he did, and maybe that's out of, first of all, it projects insecurity. Either it can project contempt or insecurity with the media. Either way, but either way, it doesn't reflect well, and it gives people, in this case, from what I'm told, like a skewed view of who you are. Also, there's this thing that happens if you're asked a question and you can't answer it in a way that satisfies the public, in this case, the fans. Then it's like, well, do you really have an answer? And I'm sure he does. And coaches withhold on us all the time. But then people are left with the impression that maybe he's in over his head. And again, I don't think he is in over his head based on everything else I hear about him. But he's projecting this insecurity or unwillingness to answer these questions in a more thoughtful way. And when you do that, you leave it open for people to judge you in a way that is harsh and probably inaccurately.
Yeah, it's a weird part of the job, because it's a part of the job that he doesn't care about, right? He does not care about, like, and it's not to say that he doesn't care about the media. It's funny. I personally have had the experience of the terse back and forth with him, and then afterwards him coming up to me and being like, I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I was just, it's what I meant to say was blah, 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 blah. And personally, I never care. I never care if a guy, wants to dunk on me on the podium or anything like that. Like, if anything, I'm like, well, I guess I set myself up for that. So fine. But you're right in that he has this outward kind of perception. And that, unfortunately, by the time that filters through the cesspool of Twitter and on its way out and through sports talk radio, and if the owners or some people who are in charge start to get wind of that, and that just becomes this perception, then that can come back and kind of poison the water, so to speak. I think you're right. I think he does have to take some kind of like go to like a finishing school for media this offseason, as well as putting his plan together. But I think more importantly, it's just the matter of keeping his team together and working with these assistants now. I think it's a very clear path for the Celtics. I think it's not lost on me that both of these guys that they hired as assistants are former players. They're both black head coaches, which matters a lot to Jaylen Brown and to Jayson Tatum to get more diversity in the coaching ranks. I think that's something they're speaking to their stars in that these are guys who are sought after and are potential future head coaches. So I think the message is very clear to the players. It's, here are guys you can relate to. Charles Lee played and was kind of like a grinder, didn't make it in the NBA. He was kind of a grinder playing overseas. Sam Cassell is a former player. He made it in the NBA. He won championships, played with legends. Both guys have been fairly successful as head coaches, coaching good teams to varying degrees of success. But they relate to the players. They relate, they bring that experience. I really think the message is clear from Brad Stevens. This isn't a long-term coaching staff, because those guys next summer are potentially going to be gone. We know we've got a couple of years. I keep saying, Howard, 2-year window. This final year under Jaylen Brown's old deal, the first year under Jaylen Brown's new deal, to win your championships and figure out your course forward. Because the year after that is the first year of Tatum's new deal. And that's when you get the two guys making 35% of the cap and you're spending over $100 million on two players. Yeah. Are you at a championship level doing that and sucking it up and saying, hey, we're just going to win. We're going to go on this run. We're going to win 2-3 championships. Not to sound like LeBron, but like that. Are you in that type of mode, or are you 2 years into this and still not winning a championship and saying, okay, now we got to figure out, these guys are just it's not going to work together. Now you're in your trade Jaylen Brown kind of category. So this staff for Joe Mazzulla, it's all about right now, lightning in a bottle. We're going to put an all-star coaching staff around this guy that we're backing. You've got a very small window to do it. So as much as I'm sitting here saying, I think this is a good hire, two good hires, it also, I think, ramps up the pressure. You got to win now.
I don't think the pressure's ever getting any higher than it already was on some level, right? Like the Celtics are already a team that is expected every year with this group to make the finals and compete for a championship, right? So that's kind of baked into it. I would hope maybe if I'm going to view this through a psychological lens, maybe it's the opposite. Maybe this takes a little bit of pressure off of him because he's got more expertise to lean on than he had last season. Maybe he'll feel, one, he's going into year 2. It's not new anymore. Mm-hmm. And 2, he'll go in with a staff that he got to assemble and that he'll have an entire summer of meetings with and a training camp with, and who will be able to, provide him a little bit more of a backstop than maybe he felt he had before. Also, look, I don't know what the dynamics were with the coaching staff that was left, but it wasn't his staff. And right. I'm guessing and have heard a little of, maybe things were a little bit strange at times, right? Like you need to have trust. You need to have relationships and a rapport. And that's hard to do given the circumstances he had last season. So, and maybe all of that additional feeling of comfort and security, rapport with your staff, everything else will then enable him to be a little bit more relaxed when he speaks to the media about, rotation decisions and timeout decisions and everything else. And maybe he'll be more relaxed and lighten up a little bit too. And again, that's not like it's almost the least of his concerns. I'm sure it is. I only bring it up now again because it does have a certain impact on the belief of your fan base. And if the fan base turns on you, it makes it that much harder, right? Because now you're dealing with everybody picking at everything and a lack of faith. Also, in general, like crowd. Sure. And think about the way that when, Spoelstra, certain things that he said along the way at key moments in their series, Everybody, wow, look at the way he just set the tone for his team, because there's a certain confidence he projects. And again, unfair comparison. Spoelstra's been doing this a long time. He's won championships, and he's as secure as any coach in the league. But Spoelstra can say things in a way that sets a tone that even if, like, you just assume, okay, the steadiness we just saw there, the confidence we saw there, the messaging we saw there, we associate that with what he's probably telling the team also. And so when that comes across strong and clear, we think that coach has got a really good hold on the situation and on his team. When that message comes across as weak or incomplete or insecure, again, maybe unfair, because his speech to the team, now Mazzulla's, might have been completely different than what we heard on the podium. But if the podium performance, and it is a performance of sorts, leaves people wondering, then you kind of wonder, maybe he's not persuading his players either.
Yeah. It's a super interesting dynamic between public perception and private kind of reality. You see some of the videos the Celtics share on their social media, and it does seem like he's a different guy behind those closed doors. We'll see. I do think the guys believe in him.
Yeah.
Otherwise they wouldn't have come back to force a game 7. I just, this whole notion of like, oh, they quit in that game 3. And then I know it looked bad, but I think they believe in him. Now add these 2 coaches to the staff, and maybe there's a little bit added juice there. So we'll see moving forward. I do think there is a ton of pressure on these guys, and we'll see how they respond. They tend to respond well to pressure. Maybe just feeling that pressure from the beginning all season long is what they need. But we'll see. Howard, go ahead.
No, just my final thought on this is, as the Celtics offseason, or as the entire NBA offseason begins in earnest soon here, I actually am more curious about what happens with their roster than I ever was with the coaching staff. And I think there's more concern with the roster than the coaching staff, because there are at least legit questions about how much further they can go with this group, both on the court and payroll wise. And so that to me is going to be the most fascinating subplot of the offseason for them. Yeah,
for sure. And it's part of the stuff that we've been talking about. I'm mad at the league for this new collective bargaining agreement, because it's making me do so much more math than I ever wanted to do.
It's complicated.
It's very complicated.
And listen, I've been doing this a long time, obviously, and I've seen various iterations of the CBA, and there have been years where I felt I had a better grasp than others. I feel like each successive version of this, just like with the tax code, because it keeps getting more complicated, I'm getting to the point where it's like, you know what, I'm ready to just throw up my hands and wait for, Bobby Marks, Eric Pincus, Larry Kuhn, the cap experts out there. You guys just, you do the analysis. I will of course attribute it dutifully every time, but I am not going to try to pretend that I can figure this out, because all these aprons, all these different things you can lose, and frozen draft picks, and good Lord, it's gotten very complicated. And even just the math, as you note, to project forward and say, this is when they're going to have to worry about being in jeopardy and losing all these exceptions, and how to avoid it. It's just really tough now. I'm and good luck to all these front offices. I hope they all have really great cap guys. If you don't have a great cap guy, you better hire one soon.
Yeah, no kidding. Yeah, and then this is why I say they have a 2-year window, because that it's not the same as it used to be. That paying those 2 guys $100 million in this new economy is outrageous. Yeah. So unless you're winning championships, and at that point, and even then, I don't even know. So this is going to be a very interesting summer and upcoming season. Howard, I know you got to get yourself to Denver, so I appreciate you hopping on. Thanks for joining us once again.
Always a pleasure, John. Thanks.
Thanks to Howard Beck for hopping on, and good discussion there starting off this week. So what's going to happen moving forward here? We're just going to start diving into individuals: Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Marcus Smart. We're going to start talking about individual performances to kind of get us through the next few weeks. Just what do they need to do? Where do they need to go from here? How are we going to start, moving forward like Howard and I talked about. So make sure you're subscribed to get all of these off-season podcasts to get us really set up for this summer and the upcoming season, which will be here before you know it. We're in the middle of June already. This is June 12th podcast. So before you know what July is going to be here, once July is gone, we get a couple of months off. It's not the podcast. Podcast is still going to go. Podcast is still 5 days a week through June and July, by the way. So keep it here. But once a couple of months off for the NBA, August and September, boom, we're back. Media Day will be here before you know it. So I've got you covered here in the Locked On Celtics podcast. Subscribe, hop onto the YouTube page, get into that comment section. Let me know what you think and share the podcast. If you're an everydayer, would love to have you spread the word. Tell everybody they should be listening to and watching the Locked On Celtics podcast right here in the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.